Welcome back to the Champagne on Ice podcast presented by the Field of 68, coming off of a pretty stunning Illinois home defeat to USC, the second straight season that Illinois has dropped a quad 3 home game in the month of January in a sleepy morning spot, pretty much an identical situation. We can get into that a little bit more, but this one was a bad loss for Illinois after a shellacking of Penn State by 40 points, in which we didn't record after that game. But the story now is a pretty tough loss for Illinois without Kasparas Jakucionis, who has missed the last two games. We'll talk about the implications of that as well, but a lot to get into as a pretty stunning defeat for Illinois at the State Farm Center on Saturday. I am Kyle Tausk, joined as always by Mike Farmer, and let's just jump right in, Mike. Your initial reaction to that loss to USC that I'm not sure a whole lot of people saw coming.
Yeah, for me, I feel like there's a lot to say, but at the same time, it's kind of simple with what happened. Illinois just didn't show up today. Pretty much looked like zero effort for most of the team. Zero energy on the bench, pretty much no energy in the arena. And the on-court performance showed that. A couple guys had some nice plays here and there, but across the board for most of the 40 minutes, kind of just a piss poor performance. And if you if you put something like that up in the Big Ten, no matter who the opponent is, you're probably going to come away with a loss. And that's what happened. So it sucked. Just bad performance across the board from the players to the coaches, and something you just got to move on from.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so similar to that Maryland loss last year, in that game was without Terrence Shannon. It was shortly after Illinois looked incredible without him at home against Northwestern. It wasn't the game after, but it was a week later. And I think, Wednesday night's game against Penn State, after it was announced less than an hour before game time, without having really known anything that happened over the weekend against Washington, it was announced that Kasparas Jakucionis had a left forearm injury. He was out. Illinois comes out, beats Penn State by 40. And I never got to give kind of this feeling on the pod I was going to if we had recorded before that Penn State game. We just didn't get around to it. But that Penn State spot felt to me, when the schedule came out, like one of those sleepy spots for Illinois. It feels like there's one of these every year under Brad Underwood. I don't know what it is, but I just was a game early on it. I thought that Penn State game could be the one, because it's a Penn State team that actually was solid, one that turns teams over a lot. And then once you saw that Kasparas was out, you thought, oh boy, this could get ugly, because Illinois hasn't prepared without him. And I don't know, it just felt like coming off that West Coast trip and how well Illinois had been playing, there was a letdown spot there. Illinois actually handled that game phenomenally, but this was the letdown spot, and I should have known, because it was an 11 a.m. tip, and those are usually the ones that Illinois comes out and just doesn't show up to play. And I don't really know why that is, but it feels like these 11 a.m. noon tips Illinois just can't get up for, and there's really no excuse for that, because USC was playing on 9 a.m. local time. This is a team from LA coming in, and they just felt more prepared to play, more hungry. Their effort was way better. Illinois gets out-rebounded for just the second time all season by a USC team that is not a good rebounding team. They have no front court. I mean, it just, again, like you said, it was just a really poor performance from Illinois. And also USC came in and did some things that really hurt Illinois, particularly Desmond Claude. I think what he finished with 31 points. Illinois had no answer for him. And you did feel the loss of KJ big time in this game. It was a little bit of fool's gold on Wednesday, thinking, oh, well, this team's so deep that you don't need your lottery pick. You don't need your projected top 5 point guard that you run everything through. Well, USC got to watch a game of film for Illinois without KJ, threw some different looks at Illinois, started switching on the perimeter, taking away some of Illinois' primary ball handlers, and Illinois just didn't have much answer to that. And, it's not a loss that necessarily changes a ton about my long-term outlook on this team, but it is a loss that hurts you in the Big Ten title race. Pretty much a can't-lose game. If you really seriously want to win a Big Ten title, you're going to need to make up for that big time now with some road wins against the top of the league. And it probably moves you down a full seed line. This is one that could change you from a 3 seed to a 4 seed, or a 4 seed to a 5 seed, or whatever it is. So, the short-term implications of the loss aren't very good. I still think ultimately you get KJ back, this team will be fine. I imagine Brad Underwood will get that rebounding situation corrected quite fast with some intense practices that I sure wouldn't want to be a part of the next couple days. But it's just a bad loss. Simple as that. A very bad loss for Illinois in the second straight year they've had a bad home loss. That's pretty unacceptable given the circumstance.
Exactly. I'm completely with you, but I do think it's the first actual bad loss of the season. You look at the Northwestern game; they choke it down the stretch. They kind of choked against Tennessee, gave up the buzzer-beating layup to end the game. But like those aren't actual bad losses. There's bad individual plays in there that fans and critics can point to and say, "Oh, Illinois should have won that game." That ends up being a bad loss. But if you look at the March resume and look at just the full season, the season in whole, those aren't actual bad losses. This loss against USC, unless they go 12-8 in conference or something and really start to get going as a good team, this is a bad loss. Like it's a quad three loss, as you mentioned, second year in a row. Felt just like the Maryland game last year. And I like your point about how Illinois beating Penn State by 40. I mean, it didn't hurt them obviously, but you get the sense that there might have been a feeling of like complacency in the locker room. Definitely was with the fan base. Not that that has anything to do with the on-court performance, but like, yeah, you beat a decent Penn State team by 40, and you think, okay, USC is coming to town in a couple days. We're going to have no problem with these guys. They've struggled the entire year. Obviously, that was not the case this morning. So yeah, I think it's just a reminder that no matter how talented your team is, you got to show up every single day in the Big Ten. Illinois didn't do that today, and USC walked out with a nice road ranked win. But yeah, I'm totally with you in terms of this win not meaning a whole lot in my personal outlook. Other people can disagree. I have no problems with that. It is a bad loss. It's a really embarrassing loss. But in terms of season outlook and how I think this team is going to perform down the stretch and against Duke and against really good teams in March in the Big Ten tournament, NCAA tournament, I think they're still good. Like the talent on this team is, I think, the best in the 18-team Big Ten. I still believe that after this loss. But it's like this loss is part of the reason why a couple weeks ago I didn't pick Illinois to win the Big Ten. Like it's such a young team. It's such an inconsistent team and unexperienced team. They got 10 new guys that have never played high major basketball. Ben Hummerkaus had played two high major games before this year. KJ, Big T, Will Riley were all high schoolers last year or playing ball in Europe. Like it's just college basketball. It's a whole different beast. It's a different animal, even if you're playing against worse competition. All these teams and their fans are going to show up every single night. And so you have to as well. And as I've said, Illinois just did not do that this morning.
Yeah, and I think, like you kind of are hinting at there, it was a bit of a reality check in that I feel like coming off this recent stretch where Illinois had looked so good, you started to think, maybe I was wrong. Maybe this will just be a consistently good team that hits their stride and goes on a big run here. Whereas, I mean, we've been talking for 4 or 5 months about how this is going to be a team that's going to have its ups and downs, its fluctuations, and there's not going to maybe be a ton of consistency, the same level of consistent effort that you got from the older teams, the Io Kofi team and last year's team where you had a bunch of seniors, you had a fifth-year Terrence Shannon and that type of star power at the top of your lineup. This team always, in my mind, was going to be one that the goal was going to be playing your best basketball and kind of have everything click into place by late February, March, heading into the tournament. But early in the season and even early into conference play, as you go through the grind of a Big Ten schedule and a very deep conference, that there's just not a lot of Minnesotas out there. I mean, USC, as much as they came into the game 94th in the net, and it's by no means a good loss. It's a solid team with talent and a really good coach in Eric Musselman in his first year there. Like it's not an easy win, one where you can show up, play extremely poorly, and expect to get out of there and win. And there's really barely any of those in the Big Ten other than Minnesota. So it feels like maybe a check back to reality for fans and just for people around this team. And I get, again, that Kasparas being out makes a huge difference, but just in general, that it's still probably going to be a little bit up and down with this team in January as you go through this Big Ten grind and you play so many quality opponents back to back to back. And I think you saw a lot of guys really had tough days, and Illinois just emotionally wasn't as invested in the game as USC was. Now that's something that can't happen again. That's something that Illinois can control. But some of the things just in terms of USC game planning wise and Illinois just not playing very well, not shooting it very well, turning it over 15 times and just having a very poor defensive performance against USC after they had risen to 7th in the country defensively. I think that stuff probably is going to happen a few more times, even when KJ comes back. But bottom line, too, is you do need your best player back. And if there was any thought of like, oh, this team can can be totally fine if he has to miss a month. No, I think that's not the case. He should hopefully be back this week, and if he isn't, then I think there is a little bit of concern.
Yeah, I don't know. Was anybody saying that this team's fine without KJ? I'm sure
I
some
just feel
people
like
were.
there was probably the thought that maybe crossed some people's mind, and I saw a little bit of this sentiment on social media of like, well, this team's so deep that if KJ has to miss 2-3 weeks, I don't think we'll miss a beat. I think you started to see that, yeah, if you don't have him at Michigan State, at Indiana coming up, I wouldn't feel too good about it.
Yeah, for sure. If we want to talk a little bit about that, like KJ, I mean, we've said the entire year, best player on the team, such a huge part of what this team tries to do offensively, especially creates looks for everybody on the team, finds open shooters in the corner on a team that shoots a ton of threes, and then gives you 16 points a game pretty much every single game. It's like a very consistent double-digit scoring night from KJ, and Illinois did not have that today, and it was pretty evident. I think obviously the 16 points and he's shooting 40+% from three. You obviously missed that today. But then like the offense just looked kind of stagnant at points. You look at the first half and Kylan Boswell's dribbling the ball up. He's kind of the primary ball handler today, which he hadn't been the rest of the season. And there's like 5 possessions where he just pulls up, kind of does kind of looks away and then shoots the three from the top of the key. I think he went 0 for 5 on those in the first half. So it's like, I don't know, there's just a little lack of, I don't know, like Illinois just was not playing how they wanted to play today. And a huge part of that is KJ. Thomas Slavovicic was barely involved today. Will Riley was trying to do more than he's done the past couple weeks. Ben Hummerkaus was decent. He found his threes. I thought Dre and Jake Davis were actually really good. And we could talk about how those guys have really stepped up off the bench the past couple weeks. That's a huge part of why this team's been good recently. But like back to KJ, I mean, Boswell was trying to do too much. He was not really. He had 6 assists, I believe, but I don't know. It just didn't feel like he was himself. And then Trey White was just kind of a ghost today, to be honest. He did not have his best performance after being so good the past couple weeks. And like when you have a guy like KJ back in the lineup, he just takes the pressure off every single guy in the starting lineup. The guys coming off the bench when KJ's still in there, they're doing less than they need to. And that's the reason why he's going to be a first-team All-Big Ten player if he does come back eventually. Like, we don't even know the injury status, really. So I'm going to be curious to see if he's actually back in this next week and how he deals with that. But yeah, like he's such a huge piece of this team, and anybody saying this team would be just fine or be okay without him is kind of delusional, to be honest.
Yeah, so the injury status is weird because we haven't really gotten a whole lot of information. Brad Underwood hasn't given a whole lot other than saying he's day to day and they're going to take every game day and make a decision. Was saying he barely even has asked about it, and I don't buy that very much. I think he knows exactly what the injury is, but he's not going to tell anybody detailed what it is. But apparently it's a left forearm injury. Now today before the game he was wearing kind of a wrap around his thumb, and you saw some swelling before the game. They showed some close-up shots, and there were some pictures taken before the Penn State game on Wednesday that showed kind of the lower part of his hand around the thumb area with some significant swelling, which makes me think maybe it is left thumb related more than left forearm. I don't know. There hasn't really been a ton of specific there, but he was warming up, went through his pregame routine before the game in both, and then the second time that Illinois came out, he was dressed for the game but didn't participate in that second real warm-up, 20 minutes before tip-off either time, and was ruled out about a half hour before tip-off. I mean, it feels like it's minor. It feels like they're probably being a little precautionary, especially, again, knowing that you had Penn State and USC, who you should have expected to take care of at home without him, and you did against Penn State, and you should have been able to against USC. You just didn't. That doesn't mean that his loss wasn't, they didn't know they were going to lose him, but it's just interesting because it does feel a little precarious with the injury. I do think one extra factor is that, look, he is a guy that's projected to go in the top 5. I think they realize that he's probably not going to push an injury if there's an ability for him to aggravate and make an injury more serious. This is a guy that's going to be signing a very big contract coming up, and he's probably not going to push through that as much as fans probably won't like that. It's the regular season. If this was March, it's a different story. But you got to get him back because he's the guy that you run things through offensively, and you really felt in this game you just didn't have that offensive creation when you needed it, and a guy that just calmed everything down, a guy that could go hit a step back three or get to the rim and calm things down when USC was on a run. Kylan was trying to do it. He just didn't play very well offensively. He was still really good defensively, but 6 turnovers. He did have 6 assists, but he took some bad shots that he hadn't been taking before, and it just felt like he felt the burden of like, okay, normally in these situations, guys turn to KJ and we put the ball in his hands, and guys are kind of standing around hoping he makes something happen for us. And Kylan was trying to take on that role, and I just didn't think he played a very smart game, and he dribbled into traffic sometimes and just had some bad turnovers, and that's just not really who he is. It wasn't who he was at Arizona. That's why Arizona played him off the ball some as well. He wasn't a guy that was going to handle the ball every time down the floor. It's just he felt like he was settling into that secondary ball handling role alongside KJ, being able to take some of that burden off of him, but they really found a rhythm next to each other. And when all of a sudden that main guy goes out and Kylan starts to feel really that full burden of like, I'm the only guy here who has any experience playing a true point guard in college basketball, and it felt like he was pressing a little bit against USC and just didn't play his best game. And so you got to have your star player back. It's so much of what Illinois does offensively is predicated around KJ. You saw the decline in looks that Tomislav Ivisic was getting. Most of his looks come off of ball screen action with Kasparas Jakucionis, and he has struggled the last 2 games offensively. Rickhouse, give him credit. I thought Illinois put him in some interesting positions to score on the inside, and he took some ambitious threes and made a couple of them against USC, but a lot of his looks come off of action with KJ, and he wasn't getting the same quality of looks against USC. So it's a trickle-down effect when you don't have that guy. So you need to have him back. And that's not an excuse to lose this game because you should have beat USC without him. But you play at Indiana, at Michigan State next week. You don't have KJ, and I think this team's in a little bit of trouble.
Yeah, no question. I do think, I don't want to be happy about a loss, but I do think like games like this do need to happen from time to time. Give teams a reality check. I mean, they were 12-3, same as last year. They fall to 12-4 with the loss at Maryland and then the loss at USC this year. And then the team still ends up really good. Like, I think, especially with this young team, maybe it's a different story last year with the team of 5 23-year-olds. But with this team, with a bunch of freshmen and guys that just haven't been in this situation before, I think it's good to have a game where, for the most part, they were trailing in most of this game. That hasn't really happened since the Alabama game in November, I believe. Like, the Northwestern loss was kind of back and forth. Illinois led for a while. Tennessee was back and forth. And they've won every other game. This game, you look at the first half, you go down early, and like it felt like you were trailing for 5 or 6 most of the first half. You got the lead at halftime somehow after a nice 10-2 run or something, I believe. But then the second half, USC comes out of the gate hot, and all of a sudden you're down again. You just got to find guys to put the ball in the basket, and some guys did it, some guys didn't. Ends up in a loss, and Illinois really was just bad down the stretch too. That was a big part of the loss, big part of the reason Illinois lost. Just kind of fell apart down the stretch, was not getting good looks on offense. Nothing was falling, shot like 22% from 3 on the day, which is a whole nother story. Something that we've talked about a lot in terms of if you're going to shoot this many threes, if you're going to shoot 30-something threes every game, there kind of needs to be more consistency. And I don't know, do you remember my New Year's Eve resolutions from our podcast a couple weeks ago?
Yeah, one of them was about 3-point shooting, and it hasn't happened since that Oregon game.
Yeah, but especially in this game, it was my first one was just more consistent 3-point shooting. If you're still going to shoot 35 a game, let's bump that percentage up a little bit. I know KJ was out, and that's a big factor, but we got to get that percentage up. My second resolution was get Big T the ball more. That just has not happened recently. The team's still been good, don't get me wrong. And then number 3 was just for a little bit more patience in the fan base. You saw some crazy reactionary takes from the fan base after this loss today. Obviously, the Big Ten title race that hurt our chances, no question, but it's not over yet. Teams like Michigan and Michigan State they're prone to, they're not immune from crazy losses or at home against decent Big Ten teams. And then people just calling for Underwood's the worst in-game adjustment coach in the country. He obviously did not have a good day today, but let's slow our roll a little bit. But yeah, overall, just not a good loss. You're 13, 14-point favorites at home. No matter what time it is, no matter if the students are there in the Orange Crush or not, That's kind of a win you got to come away with, and Illinois didn't do that today. But all in all, I mean, today sucked. Just terrible, terrible performance all around, really. But I think in the end, Illinois is going to be fine, and I think most people do believe that in their heart of hearts.
Yeah, you hit on two things there that I want to talk about because they're kind of the two longer term concerns that I do have a little bit coming off of this game and really just in general what I've seen from Illinois up to this point. And one of them is the 3-point shooting because I do think that this is a team that has built an offense around taking a lot of threes. And that's something that Brad Underwood has leaned into. And for the most part, they've gotten a lot of good shots, and that offensive approach, especially when you have KJ in there, has generated good looks for Illinois. I didn't think they got very good looks in this game, and I think a lot of that did have to do with the fact that you didn't have KJ in there. But it felt like even though Illinois shot very poorly today, 7 of 32, it wasn't necessarily a game I came away thinking, man, if we could just make a wide open shot, this game would have been different. There wasn't a ton of wide open catch and shoot shots. A lot of the threes Illinois took, I thought, were forced and just weren't super high quality looks. Almost all 5 of Kylan Boswell's 3-point attempts I thought were just bad shots. I don't really want Trey White taking a 3 unless it's a wide open catch and shoot where the team's not guarding him and you want to make him start guarding him out there. He took 4 of them, missed all of them. I thought a few of Ben's were a little ambitious, made a couple of them, but I didn't think he had a lot of separation on a lot of his shots. Will Riley's just off right now, forced a couple. Like it felt like Illinois wasn't generating great shots. In general, I think they have been, but they just have not shot it consistently from 3 on the season right now. They're shooting 33% from 3, which ranks 194th in the country, and that's just not going to cut it based on what this Illinois offense does. And you look based on some of the numbers, I'll shout out Brad Sturdy here, who had the stat on Twitter, but Illinois has shot 33.3% or below from 3 in 11 of their 16 games now, and 7 of their 9 high major games. They've shot under 33% from 3, and that's not a good trend for the way that this offense is built. And you're deep enough into the season now. You're more than halfway. This game was more than halfway through the regular season. You got 31 regular season games. This was game 16. And you can start to take these numbers at face value a little bit more now when you're more than halfway through the year, and close to 200th in 3-point shooting does not make me feel very good. And I just think, for me, the one thing I want to see with this team is pivoting in game a little bit more, especially in closer games, because I think this team is really good when they're attacking and when they're getting to the free throw line. And 2 of their last 3 games at Washington, I thought when Washington was making that late run down the stretch of the game to kind of try to steal that game from Illinois, Illinois settled for some threes late in a game where they had 52 paint points and Washington had no answer for them around the rim. And it felt like Illinois settled and got to their 26 3-point attempts in that game. And then in this game, USC's playing a small ball lineup. They have no rim protection as is. Their front court is thin. They weren't playing a true center. Illinois was shooting, I think, 18 of 19 from the free throw line at one point or close to it. And Illinois, when they were trying to erase that late deficit, was just settling for tough contested threes. And I think that's the pivot I want to see. I don't necessarily think you need a full-blown offensive 180 for if you're Brad Underwood, but just late in games and just when you know it's not your day from 3 or when you know you're not generating the types of looks you want, I want to see this Illinois team make that pivot, attack a little bit more down the stretch of games. And it'd help if a few guys did start making some shots, because I do think they are probably going to still take about 30 of them a game, and you got to shoot better than 33% long term if this team's going to make a Final Four.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I think the thing was today, like, I mean, obviously the 3-point shooting was terrible. That goes without saying. The 2-point, like driving to the hoop, getting some mid ranges, that wasn't great. But I think at certain points, it's a better option than just settling and chucking a 30-foot 3 from Will Riley. Like, the thing that bothered me today was Illinois is such a good rebounding team. You've seen it the whole year. They're number 1 in rebound margin. And then today they had like 2 offensive rebounds with, I think, 10 minutes left in the game, something like that. That might not be exactly right. Like, you have Merez in there for most of the game. Big T was really not doing much. You got Merez in there. Merez's best trade is rebounding and offensive rebounding too as well. He just had a fantastic game against Penn State, had 20 and 10. And then you have guys just chucking up threes. Like, Merez is going to get an offensive rebound if you drive to the hoop. if Colin Boswell drives to the hoop, he's going to get fouled probably against USC because they have no rim protection. Just really not a great defense in general either. He's gonna get fouled. He might miss a layup, but Perez is gonna grab that, or he makes the layup. I think it's just a better outcome of results than shooting a three and hoping it goes in from 26 feet and it's fully contested too. But I don't know, like it's still a team of good shooters, but you do get to a point where a shooting slump is no longer a shooting slump, and that's kind of just the shooter you are. I'm not saying any names in particular, but like I don't know. I think I'm with you. I think in certain games, especially this past game against USC, you got to switch things up. You got to realize that threes aren't working. Even if you get hot, like I mean, I don't know. Even if you get hot, you still got to go to the hoop at times. They were doing really well from the free throw line. The free throw shooting has been a lot better this year in general too. So I don't know. Like you had Ogbo and AG, and like their starting center wasn't playing at all. You got to just take advantage of that. And I think guys were just prone to settling today, and that was a huge part of the reason Illinois lost.
Yeah, you just ultimately this team's not going to shift what they do, and I still do think you have a lot of good shooters when you play the lineup. Do your healthy starting lineup when KJ is back. You've got four guys that you should feel comfortable can make a shot, and then Trey White, who if you give him a wide open one, I think he can make them, although obviously he's more of a slasher and a guy who's a 29% three-point shooter. But then even you bring DGL off the bench, and I still believe, and we can talk about him in a few minutes here, but Will Riley is going to start making threes again. The guy was one of the best shooters in the entire prep class coming in. He didn't just forget how to shoot. He's going to start making them. We were on this boat with Ben Rickhouse for a while. I realize that Will Riley looks very broken right now. I do want to talk about him, but he's going to start making threes, especially some of the open ones he's gotten. I didn't think he got open ones in the USC game. He got open ones against Penn State, just clanked them. He's going to start making them at some point. You have good shooters on this team. On paper, this team should be a lot better than 33%, especially when you throw in Kylan Boswell's 26%. Just continues to baffle me, although it'd help if he didn't take some of the ones he took against USC. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, I just think some of the late game stuff and situationally, I think Illinois needs to be a little bit smarter about picking and choosing their spots of when to attack and when to settle and when to take some of their threes. But the bottom line is start making them again. You got to be more consistent making these shots, I think, and I'm starting to get a little bit concerned on that front. But the other thing I wanted to talk about, and you mentioned it briefly earlier too, Tomislav Ivisic is struggling badly right now, and he was so important to Illinois early on. But in conference play so far, in the 6 Big Ten games, he's shooting 38% from the floor as a 7'1" big man, averaging just 8 points per game. And it just feels like he's struggling. And it feels like he's struggling not necessarily in a Benham Rickhouse or Will Riley type of way where it's like this guy is really good offensively and he's just going through it. He can't buy an open shot right now. It feels like he's struggling in a sense of like this could be a long-term issue for him in that when he's going against more physical, true big men, and not your, whoever Eastern Shore Illinois was playing earlier in the year, it feels like he's struggling with the physicality and he just doesn't have the touch around the rim and the low post game to get himself easy buckets and to get himself involved in the game. And that's why I said earlier, like a lot of his shots this year and a lot of his offense have come off ball screens with KJ and guys creating for him. And he's a big that's just not putting himself in the action a whole lot, and when he gets a favorable matchup, it feels like he's just not quite good enough to exploit it, and that hurts Illinois' offense, and I do think that he can ultimately get better and just get more comfortable to that physicality, and Illinois can run some more things through him, which I'd still like to see, especially when you talk about like high post stuff, top of the key stuff, using his playmaking a little bit more, putting him in maybe a zoom action or allowing him to slip off a screen to the rim on a play where he's the primary playmaker. But just in general, his offense has been concerning here recently. When the three ball's not going, he's not giving you a whole lot. There were some finishes around the rim that he should have made against USC and didn't. There were matchups in the post that he should have taken advantage of and just looked a little bothered. And I'm starting to get a little bit concerned knowing that now we've got 6 games of Big Ten sample size and his numbers are largely bad on the offensive end of the floor, that's something that could linger long term, and Illinois can't afford to have that because he's still super important to what Illinois does, and their best lineup is still with him at the 5.
Yeah, completely agree. Like, you remember the Chicago State game? Obviously, one of the worst teams in the country. Obviously undersized too, just matchup nightmare with Big T in there. But like Illinois force fed Big T in the first 4 minutes of the game. I think he had 6 shot attempts. I'm not saying I need to see that against, let's say, Indiana in a couple days, but I like when guys are cold and when guys are kind of going through it. I feel like a lot of coaches nationally will have a design play in the first couple seconds of the game to get this guy a look and try to get him hot to start a game. I want to see something like that with Big T because I do think he's probably not as good of a player as we thought he was based on those first 6 or 7 games of the season. But I think he's still a starting quality Big Ten center. I don't think that's in question at all. I mean, the guy's 7'2". He's been a great rebounder all year. He was a great finisher, still a great 3-point shooter. The finishing's fallen off. I think there's just been some issues with, as you said, physicality and adjusting to a Big Ten style of play instead of playing Chicago State and Maryland Eastern Shore. But like, I still think he's a great player. And he's just a very valuable piece to this team because Merez is kind of an undersized center for as much of a dog as he is. I think having Big T, a 7'2" guy that's 230 pounds, like it's a difference maker in the Big Ten that has a lot of pretty good bigs that you're going to be playing soon. So I want to see Illinois just like first 4 minutes of the game, get Big T 2 or 3 looks. If he misses them, so be it. I want to see like it ties in with the 3-point shooting. I know Big T is one of the 3-point shooters on this team, but he's also one of the low post presences on this team as well. So I want to see Illinois like not force feed him, just get him the ball, get him in pick and roll action with KJ when KJ is back in the game and back healthy. And I think that's going to get Illinois where they want to be offensively because they've had like the Oregon game and the Penn State game were kind of offensive outbursts. But like other than that, recently Illinois has had some really poor offensive games, and it should be a really good offensive team, and Big T should be a really big part of that. He just hasn't been. So I think he's not going to be as great. He's not going to be an all Big Ten second team player like some people thought he was, like myself included. But I still think he's a valuable piece for this team. I think most people would agree with that. And I want to see Illinois involve him more. Like the shot attempts just have not been there. His minutes have been going down. He hasn't been rebounding as much because he's not been in the game, frankly. But yeah, I think they just need to use him more, and the playmaking will like Illinois' assist numbers, Illinois' playmaking abilities will be helped by Big T's involvement quite a lot, in my opinion. So I just think get him the ball more to see what happens.
Yeah, and I still think that he's a guy that is going to do a lot of positive things for Illinois offensively, and I still think you want to have him involved offensively as much as you can, but the onus also is going to be on him to just become a little bit more of a threat on the inside and also be willing to attack matchups. Like when USC was 5-way switching at one point in the game, and Tomislav got a matchup on a guy, they're playing their small ball lineup, he's going against a 6'7" guy, and he backs down twice and kind of gets walled up and kicks it out for a long Dre Gibbs Lawhorn 3. USC does not send a double. Like, if I'm an opponent right now, I'm never sending a double on Tomislav in the post. I'm saying go make 4 left hooks on our center or even on our 6'7" wing who's strong, and then we'll send a double at you and allow you to kick out and find guys for 3. Like, he's not a guy that's necessarily going to command 2 defenders right now, and he should be able to do that because he is skilled offensively, and teams have started to adjust to some of the pick and pop stuff, so now he's got to be able to be more of a threat on the inside to make the defense worry about him a little bit more. And right now, defenses are fine leaving him on single coverage and forcing him to beat them, and he's just not being aggressive enough and not finishing well enough for him to be the threat that Illinois needs him to be so they can start using his playmaking a little bit more. So that I think part of it is on him. He's got to be a little better. He's got to adjust a little quicker. He's going to have a really, really tough matchup on Tuesday against Umar Ballo of Indiana, and that'll be a test for him to see how well he can perform in that one. I do think, again, his perimeter ability is going to be huge in that game, but he's going to have to play physical because Omar Ballo is probably the most physical big Illinois will see the rest of the year. Will Riley, where are we at on him right now? I think this week He still is struggling offensively, still is really struggling from three. I think he only made one three this week, and what I think did he maybe hit a couple against Penn State or just one? He was 0 for 3 today. Just doesn't have his shot still. I did think he played a little bit better this week. He had 6 rebounds, 6 assists against Penn State. I thought he did some good things, was active, thought he played really well defensively in that game. Thought he was pretty solid at times in this USC game too. He created a couple shots around the rim, got a BS travel call on an and one on a really nice move to the basket, missed a bunny late in the game that could have helped Illinois chip away, but I thought he was putting some pressure on the rim, and it was the best that he's done in terms of attacking the basket and just actually getting to the rim and not being forced outside of the paint with some physicality in that USC game. But he's still only 7 points in each game. You're going to need to get him going. He's going to have to get going. It was discouraging to see in 2 games, and hopefully it's the only 2 games without KJ, that your other projected NBA draft pick, a guy who's a gifted individual scorer, couldn't quite step up and give you a 20-point game and give you some offense, especially late in that USC game. But I still believe it's coming for him. I'm not going to say that, this is the Will Riley you're going to get all season. I do think there were some encouraging signs this week, but we're going on a month and a half of him shooting it extremely poorly and just feels like he's in his own head, doesn't have a lot of confidence whenever he puts up a 3. Where are you at on him right now and moving into these next couple weeks?
I'd say my panic meter is around a 7. I mean, the first month of the season when you're playing bye games against Eastern Illinois, Southern Illinois, he was amazing. He looked like the first round talent that NBA scouts had perceived him to be in high school. He looked like the guy Illinois fans were expecting based on him being a 5-star recruit out of high school. And yeah, this past month and a half, it's been brutal, to be honest. The shooting has been abysmal, and that's a lot of open looks he's getting and just flat out missing corners from the 3 short by a foot. I don't know. I have questions about his I'm kind of in a weird space because I saw him in high school, and it's he's facing undersized guys, but he's getting to the hoop. He's taking awkward shots and making all of them. And he's kind of trying to replicate that against better players in the Big Ten now that he's in college. And it's not really working. He is kind of struggling to get to the hoop, I think. And that should be a pretty big part of his game considering he's 6'8", I believe. Yeah. And then, the 3-point shooting's been brutal. I feel like he's not really shooting too many mid-ranges anymore. He could be in his own head, but just the on-court results have been brutal to say the least. And that's a guy that's a starter now that KJ's out. He's been the 6th man pretty much the entire year, getting a lot of minutes still. Brad Underwood is still trusting him with the ball in his hands, really. I feel like he's a guy that still kind of has the green light in terms of taking wild shots, at least based on my perception. So, it's weird. I don't know. I'm really not sold on him completely breaking out and being the player that a lot of people expected him to be, at least in his freshman year. But I don't think he's a guy that's going to slide to the 8th man on the bench. He's going to fall out of the rotation by any means. But I feel like I need to see something in the next couple games. These past 2 games should have been the games where he broke out, in my opinion. I do agree. He could still be an X factor for this team, a guy that comes off the bench and scores 14 points, like Dre Gibbs-Lawhorn has done a couple times recently. But yeah, I'm not sold on it. I would love to see it, don't get me wrong, but Ben Hummerkaus was a guy that I've seen the results at the college level, so I'm not going to doubt him if he's shooting 2 for his last 22 3-pointers. Will Riley as a freshman, on the other hand, I'm a doubter right now, to say the least.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to get the guy from November again. I think that was, a product of the competition and just a guy that you see it sometimes with freshmen who are just red hot coming out of the gate. And then once you hit that freshman wall, it's hard to get out of that and get out of your own head sometimes. I don't think you're necessarily going to get that version. I certainly just don't think you're going to get this bad, this broken of a shot version of him the rest of the year. At some point that's going to come back. He's too talented of a scorer. I definitely agree with you. I mean, all throughout high school and his AAU days, he was a tough shot guy. It wasn't necessarily a guy that was just gliding to the rim, playing above the rim, and a guy that was creating all this space. It was a guy that was feasting off of tougher twos and just creating that inch of space and using his 6'8" size to rise up over, elevate over a guy and make a shot. And some of those things just aren't working for him against longer defenders and guys that can bother him, get up into him a little more physically. So I think, in terms of a guy that's going to light up a game, I don't know if you're necessarily going to get that the rest of this year. I think that's something that if he were to return for next year, if he were to put on 15 more pounds and just, adjust and get better, that's something that could happen as a sophomore. But I don't necessarily think you're getting the 31-point explosion from opening night again. But I certainly think that at some point he's going to make some of the shots. Like this week, I thought he got a lot better looks than he had been getting, and he still was missing them because right now he's just slumping that badly. I don't think that can last forever, just like I don't think Ben Omrickhouse's slump could have lasted forever, and now he's starting to break out of it. But I totally agree with you. I think that there is a level of just that's kind of his style of game is tougher shots, and it's probably going to be maybe a season-long adjustment period to realize that that's just not going to fly really against this type of competition.
I will say, can I make one point?
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I forgot to mention this. I mean, we saw in those games where he was scoring 20, he can flip a switch at any moment and become a guy that's your number one option all of a sudden, and you're already 32 minutes into a game. So I think that could be coming, but just like season long, I don't think he's going to be the contributor that we thought he would be. But he's probably still going to have a game or two where he just flips a switch, drops 10 points in 8 minutes or something like that. So look out for that maybe.
Last thing I want to talk about before we briefly discuss the game on Tuesday night against Indiana. Defensively, I'll give my take on it from this USC game. I'm still buying this team defensively. I think the trend that we've seen, and Illinois coming into this game had risen into the top 7 in defensive efficiency on KenPom and was phenomenal defensively without KJ on Wednesday against Penn State, held them to 52. That was their lowest points per possession, Penn State's, and there were some bad Penn State's teams in there since 2010. So Illinois was spectacular Wednesday. I think this was a one-off, really terrible defensive performance from Illinois. It was a bad game. I think there were a lot of things that Illinois did poorly. Brad Underwood took some ownership for some of the game plan things and some of the adjustments that they made when Desmond Claude was hurting them early, and some of the switching that they did, which I thought was just a terrible game plan. USC just doesn't have many shooters out there on the floor. There was one guy, I forget what his name is, AG, who hit 3 threes. He had made 2 threes all season coming into the game. All of a sudden, Illinois switching on the perimeter to take away his pick and pop. Like, just let him take those. If he takes 14 of them, he's going to make 4 at the end of the day, even if he made a couple early. And they weren't going under a lot of Desmond Claude screens. I mean, they were face guarding him 30 feet from the rim. This is a guy that shot 26% from 3 in his career, and he feasts from inside 10 feet, and Illinois was just allowing him driving lanes. Morez Johnson was getting switched on him and being left in no man's land, either foul him or give up a layup at the rim. Illinois in general in this game gave up 19 shots at the rim, and they've been a top 5 rim defense all season long. They were really bad defensively, and there just wasn't a lot of guys that played very well on that end, and I thought some of the things that they were doing just probably shouldn't have been their game plan in this game. I would have played 5 feet off of Claude, and it just felt like they were over-aggressive, got hung up trying to go over screens on a 26% shooter. All of a sudden, he's got a free line to the rim. Illinois was a little too foul-happy late in the game. I think some of the defensive rebounding stuff that they struggled with, I have no concerns that that'll get fixed because Brad Underwood will have that fixed before the Indiana game. I think this is still an elite rebounding team. I'm not going to overreact defensively to USC putting up 82 and Desmond Claude putting up 31 on this Illinois team because I think it was kind of a one-off sleepy, poor execution, poor game plan, just bad defensive performance. I think in general I'm still pretty encouraged with what this team has been defensively, and I do think it actually, even though he's maybe not the greatest defender of all time, I do think getting another perimeter guy who has played pretty well at times and KJ back in the lineup will help defensively against a matchup like Claude, where I think KJ actually could have been pretty effective as a guy that Illinois put on him too.
Yeah, I'm not buying the one-off poor performance. I was just mad with the switching. Claude was abusing the entire team in the second half.
Yeah.
And then I feel like a lot of it fell on Morez, even though it wasn't really Morez's fault. Claude
was left out to dry, yeah.
Exactly. Claude was going downhill against a freshman big man, who is one of the best freshman defenders I've seen, by the way. One of the best rebounders, too. But yeah, Perez was just falling for fakes, kind of just he was getting bodied by Claude, who's a veteran. So I think things will get fixed. The rebounding was terrible. They didn't like they barely had offensive rebounds until late in the second half. Got out rebounded as a whole. So I think those things will get fixed. I think game plan stuff will get fixed. Yeah, having KJ back is pretty big because we didn't anticipate him being a really good defender this season. But like I'm seeing NBA scouts, NBA draft analysts saying his defense has been like one of the most underrated parts of his game so far.
He's been
So
very serviceable on defense,
exactly,
yeah,
yeah.
and his size too against a 6'6" type wing slash guard kind of tweener like Claude. I actually think he would have helped a lot in this game.
Yeah, he could have for sure. But I don't know. Perez had a bad game. Some of it was his fault. Most of it wasn't. But I think Illinois will be fine. Still one of the best rebounding teams in the country, which is huge.
Yeah, I think the rim defense, it just they were just being put in bad positions there, and I just think it was uncharacteristic a lot of the things that they were doing, and the fact that they didn't even put Kylan on Claude really the entire game. He was in foul trouble in the second half, but he had Brad Underwood had him on him in the first half. At one point, Kylan created 2 turnovers, and then they went back to Rickhouse and Trey White on him, and they were kind of trying to dork him a little bit, but once a couple of USC's other guys were hitting a few shots, then all of a sudden Illinois was getting way over aggressive. They were switching on the perimeter, even switching 5-way at some time with Tommy and Merez in the game, which I think is just terrible matchups for a guy like that. I don't think it was Brad Underwood's best game. I don't think really any player had a very good defensive game, maybe other than Kylan, who I thought did play pretty well when he was in there. But I'm not all that concerned about it. I still am buying this team defensively. I think this was one where they just didn't have a very good plan, didn't execute it well. And unless I see it happen again against Indiana, I'm not going to be all that concerned about it, even though it is very disappointing the way they played. Let's briefly talk Indiana here. Illinois goes to Bloomington on Tuesday night. This is an Indiana team that has won, I believe, 5 games in a row as we record this. Now they play Iowa a couple hours after we're done recording this, and I won't have it up until after that game. So not sure what happened in that Iowa game. Maybe Indiana will have won 6 in a row. Maybe they'll have lost that game in Iowa City. But they're playing a little bit better. Their schedule still hasn't been anything. Like the best team they beat in that stretch was Penn State, who Illinois we just saw dismantled by 40. I still am not all that high on this Indiana team. They are missing one of their best scorers in Malik Renew, a front court piece who, I'll be honest, I think there's a lot of things they do better when he's not out there, because I just didn't like this Indiana roster construction with their 2 bigs, and I think you're starting to see the best version of Umar Ballo when he's not out there, and he's really bad defensively, so I don't necessarily think that's a positive for Illinois, that he's going to miss this game. But I still think Illinois, if you get KJ back in this one, you should have a really good chance to go in there. I know it's Assembly Hall. It's a tough place to play. Illinois hasn't had a whole lot of success there recently at all, but I think Illinois matches up pretty well with this team. The one thing I'd be a little bit concerned about is Umar Ballo, the way he's come on recently and just his physicality. I think you're going to need to see a lot of Merez there, but I'd get concerned about some foul issues and just the fact that he'll be giving up 4 inches on a guy like that. I wonder if Brad Underwood will go to trapping him and forcing some of Indiana's guys to attempt some threes, which they just hate doing as a team.
Please.
Unless it's Luke Goody. This is a team that doesn't shoot a lot of threes. I think that does play into the strengths of Illinois' defense. So I don't know. I still feel pretty good about this game if you can tell me you get at least a 90+% KJ back and healthy. If you don't get him, I do get a little concerned going on the road. It's not an Indiana team that's all that great on the perimeter defensively, doesn't turn you over a ton, so maybe you can last there. I just think for these next 2 road games, you got to get KJ back or I'll be a little concerned. It really will change how I feel about both games. I think, we'll talk Michigan State on a different episode that we'll record late next week, but I think Illinois has some matchup advantages in both these next 2 road games, but you got to have your best player out there for me to feel confident in it happening.
If KJ's back, they're winning this game. I firmly believe that. They would have a major backward advantage. Bala would be an issue. I think Mbako could be an issue. He's definitely had a sophomore leap, I think. But yeah, it's just like I have a point about Malik Renew. Malik Renew might be my least favorite Big Ten player. Like I've watched in my lifetime. Nothing personal, but like I don't know. They're just so clogged up when he's playing. It's I think it's really a benefit that he's out. I think Mike Woodson knows that in his heart of hearts, but like you can't just bench a guy. So yeah, no renew is kind of that's big for Indiana, honestly, which is weird to say.
I agree
But
with you
yeah, I
100%.
think most people do. It's obvious.
I think a lot
Watch
of
that
Indiana
team.
fans agree.
90% of them probably do. They struggle in every bye game when Malik Renew's playing, putting up 15 shots a game, but he's not going to be playing, so whatever. I think Balo is definitely an issue against Big T. I think Marez, for as good of a defender as he is, I think he could still have issues if he's in the
Yep.
game against Balo, just because he's a veteran. He's massive. He's so physical. But I think Illinois has such a backcourt advantage. I think besides Mbako, they have better players across the whole board. You're playing Trey Galloway and Miles Rice. Carlisle's just not been good this year. He was hyped up as a transfer addition. And then I think you just got to let them shoot threes. Let them live or die by the three, even though they don't want to do that at all. If Luke Goody comes out and hits 7 threes in a revenge game, I'll live with it. It'll suck, but I'll live with it. So I think Illinois is just a way better team. I don't trust Mike Woodson. I still really don't trust this roster. They haven't beat a top 50 team in the country yet this year. Illinois beat a couple and played pretty well recently, besides this USC loss. So yeah, I think on the road is tough. It will be really tough without KJ, but I think if KJ's back, I feel like he'll be back. I think Illinois comes away with a win.
I'm with you. If you tell me KJ's back, and again, I don't know if that necessarily will happen, but it just feels like it's been more overly precautionary than anything. I do feel like, especially having seen Illinois struggle without him a lot more than on Wednesday, that I think he'll do everything he can to play in this game. I'll work under the assumption that he'll be back on Tuesday. Maybe he won't be, but I just have a feeling he probably now gets a couple more days and going on the road in a big game that Illinois really could use now after dropping that game to USC. That I think he probably plays in this game, but we'll see. If he does, I do feel good about Illinois going into this game. It will be interesting to see what the philosophy is defensively, because we know Brad Underwood, he wants to run teams off the 3-point line and force you into the mid range. I just think you kind of got to adjust that a little bit, and unless it is Luke Goody. And I mean, is there anybody else on this Indiana team? Mbako's shooting it well
And
from
Baco's
three, but
good.
he's a guy that's not going to make a lot of movement shots. Like, he's going to need stationary catch and shoot shots really to shoot it effectively, to where you obviously can't help off him off drives, but I don't necessarily think that's a guy that, you need to be chasing around vigorously. Um, yeah, those two guys, other than those two guys, like anybody else attempting a three on this team, I'll live with it. And if they make five of them, like whoever that dude on USC was, it is what it is. You live with that. There's not a lot of shooting on this team, and it's a team that doesn't really like to take threes. So you're going to be kind of forcing them out of their game. Really, they're at their best when they're working in pick and roll action with Balo, with Miles Rice with the basketball, and their guards are getting into the paint and drawing fouls. And that's the one thing that Illinois is going to have to be a lot better at, is containing dribble drives. And a guy like Miles Rice, who's played a little bit better here and can get going downhill, that's where a guy like Kylan Boswell's got to be a lot better. And you can't have a Desmond Claude situation there. But Balo's going to be the big matchup. Illinois' bigs are going to have a challenge on their hands. I wouldn't mind seeing Illinois send a couple bodies at him, because I do think if you leave him in single coverage all game, it could be a tough one for Illinois, and that's where, again, it'll be interesting to see. Brad Underwood hates trapping anything in the post. Will you switch that up and say, hey, we'll help off this 23% shooter, Cannon Carlisle, or Trey Galloway, who struggled from three in his career, to where, all of a sudden now you are sending two bodies at Balo and trying to slow him down, because I don't really like Big T matched up with him one-on-one. I think Merez could get pretty foul happy there if you leave him on an island. So be interesting to see. I do just think Illinois has the better backcourt, like you said. I just don't think this Indiana team's all that great defensively, especially on the perimeter, to where if you get KJ back, I think he can have a big game. This Indiana team doesn't turn you over much I like Illinois here to bounce back. They have bounced back from these bad losses that they've had, it feels like, and it feels like every time Illinois has had a poor performance this year already, they've bounced back, played pretty well the next time out. You think back to last year when they had the similar loss to Maryland. The next game out, they crushed Michigan on the road without Terrence Shannon, so maybe even without KJ, you have a chance to do that. But obviously this Indiana team's a lot better than last year's Michigan team. Just in general, though, I think Illinois has proven they usually respond pretty well from these letdowns the next time out, and I think this will be no different. I'm still not that in on Indiana. I think Illinois is a better team. I don't think Assembly Hall is quite as upbeat with the Mike Woodson era as they've been in years past.
Yeah, I honestly think with or without KJ, they win. Are we doing score predictions? Because, I mean, that is a big factor still.
Let's not do it because it just totally changes if KJ's not out there. Like, we could give two different predictions, but there's just no point in that. We got to see if KJ's back or not. I think we'll just leave it at good feeling about this game, especially if KJ's back. I'm with you. I think they have a chance to win without him too, though.
But yeah, I think they're in a good position still. USC loss sucks, but as you said, they bounce back typically. I think Indiana's not going to be an exception, regardless of whether or not KJ's out. I think Illinois gets to 5-2 in Big Ten play, and some of the troll Illinois fans that are coming out and saying fire Underwood after this game are going back into their holes.
Yeah, that crowd's always going to come out after a game like that. I just brushed that past. I will say, I think for me, if Illinois realistically wants to get themselves back into the true Big Ten title race, I mean, you still have over half the season left, but if you truly want to be a legitimate threat to win the Big Ten now, in my opinion, you got to win the next two, and that includes at Michigan State on Sunday. You got to make up for that USC loss by winning both these road games, because I just think you've put yourself in a hole now, losing at Northwestern, a game you should have won, but then a home loss to a team that's probably not going to make the tournament. It's going to be tough with Purdue's home court advantage in their trio they've got, and Michigan State both sitting undefeated right now, and then you putting yourself another game behind Michigan State if you lose on Sunday, and their schedule the rest of January is a cakewalk other than Illinois. You probably got to get that game if you truly want to confidently say this team's going to be in the mix for the Big Ten title come that last stretch of the year against Michigan and Purdue. But ultimately, long term and March potential-wise, you want to talk about that. Like, one loss in early January is not going to change much on that, especially not having your best player out there. I think this can be a bit of a reality check and a wake-up call. I think Brad Underwood is going to get that rebounding fixed quite fast. I wouldn't be surprised if Illinois dominates the glass against Indiana, flies in for 18 offensive rebounds with what I expect these next two practices to be with Brad Underwood the next couple days. So my concern level, and I had the same sentiment last year after that Maryland loss about this Illinois team going forward, is it hasn't changed very much. I ultimately think this team will be fine. It's a very disappointing loss. It's a loss that definitely can affect things down the line, but ultimately I still feel pretty good about where this team is at. I still think this is one of the best teams in the Big Ten. I still think this is a team that if they continue to progress and things go the way they're supposed to, can be a true national threat come March. And I'm not going to change that based on one sleepy home spot against a decent USC team, albeit one you should have beaten in early January.
Yeah, you potentially drop a seed line today with a pretty crappy loss against USC. Why not win it back with a win against Duke in Madison Square Garden in a couple weeks? That's still on the table.
Yeah, that one's going to be a fun game, because the other factor of that is the ACC is so bad that Duke is going to be coasting until that game. They got to be very glad they scheduled that game, because they're going to get challenged almost none in the ACC. And for Illinois, that could be a win that makes up that seed line and then some. I think that Duke team is going to be really hard to beat in late February. I'm not really looking forward to having a guard Cooper flag. That's not going to go very well for Illinois, I don't think.
Yeah, but Duke's 3 games before that, kind of as you mentioned, KenPom number 124 Cal, number 95 Stanford, number 122 Virginia, and then after Illinois, number 130 Miami.
The ACC
you will never see that
sucks
in the Big Ten. It's a mid-major league. That's crazy.
There's mid-major leagues better than it this year, truly. It's that
Easily,
bad.
yeah.
Anyway, we'll leave it there. Make sure to drop a follow on our Twitter at Champagne on Ice. Subscribe to the Field of 68 Podcast Network YouTube channel. All our episodes stream live there, and get us wherever else you get your podcasts. We're on Apple, Spotify, Google, anywhere else you can find us there. We will be back sometime after that Indiana game, before that Michigan State game. Recap that one, update KJ's status. That Michigan State game will be a huge game for Illinois, a Michigan State team that looks much improved and one that probably will compete for a Big Ten title. So we definitely want to preview that one a little bit more in depth than we have the last couple ones. So make sure you tune in sometime late next week, TBD, for our next episode. But until then, hope everybody enjoys the game on Tuesday night, and we'll talk to you next time right here on the Champagne on